How are we doing, everyone? I hope everyone is keeping well. So, welcome to the next episode of the NK Active podcast. And I'm really excited about this one. This is most probably going to be my most favorite podcast ever because I'm just super excited about the topic. What we're going to be chatting about today is this wonderful shoe. And forget your Nike 4% Alpha Flies, Vapor Flies. This is the shoe I was most excited about in 2020. The Osaka IDO MK1, the first ever proper hockey shoe. And I am really excited that we have Paul Griffin, fellow podiatrist, who was integral in helping design this shoe. So let's bring Paul in. How are we doing, Paul?
Well, thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me. And that was a really lovely introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, so I've known you for a while now, and I know you were sort of integral in sort of helping getting this shoe from concept back into actually me being able to physically have it in my hand. And I am extremely grateful that I was managed to get sent a pair. And I'll chat about my thoughts. We can chat about my thoughts later on, but I just want to sort of hear your journey of how have you got to where you are now?
Yeah, it's a relatively atypical journey, I think, with regards to the footwear industry. I started off as a podiatrist with an athlete care musculoskeletal model from, I think I graduated in 1998, yeah, and then I practiced until 2017, but around circa 2013, 14, I found that I was attending conferences, and which was great for the cottage community that is podiatry and the relationships. But I felt I wanted to delve into another space that was just parallel to what we actually did as far as I guess patient care. And one of the things I think that podiatry offers, and you would understand this, and it's one of the reasons why you have a pair of those shoes in your hands is, and it's often overlooked, is that the profession has a real intimate insight into footwear, as far as not from the end of design concept, but from the end of consumer experience. And so we sort of see the shoes once the patient has them, or they've been, and that's how we prescribe shoes, is we see features in shoes that we like, and we can match that up with the patient's needs. And that then creates a great consumer experience. And so from 2013, 14 onwards, I think I started exploring athletic footwear, along with other things that I was doing with startups and I guess you can call them side hustles. So the first footwear, conference I attended was what Mike Friton workshop in Hong Kong. Mike Friton was one of the original founders of the Nike Innovation Kitchen. You can check out his webpage. You'll see some great photos of Bauman and Mike hacking shoes apart, putting things together, so on and so forth. Mike was a great runner in his own right. He's based in Portland, Oregon, and he's just, really well connected in the footwear industry. He's a real innovator. And Mike's thing that I took away from the workshop was it started to really tap into the side of the brain which was more creative. And I felt I was really lacking that in clinical practice. It was kind of very routine, and all of a sudden I got this taste for being a little bit creative, and it mixed in with I guess the material science, the background knowledge I had with the consumer insights into footwear, combined with the knowledge of biomechanics and athlete requirements for sport. And so I really got this bug as to wanting to know more about it. And it was just delving into that space. And so from there, I started reaching out into more of an international footwear community. And as you know, I live in Perth in Western Australia, which is the most isolated city in the world. So isolated, in fact, that we don't have COVID-19. I know that sounds crazy, but there's 2.2 million people here. There's no COVID.
Well,
The
you
borders have
talk
been,
about that, the
yeah,
isolation bit. I didn't realize how isolated it was. And I'm going to show a bit of naivety. I didn't realize actually, when you look at Australia, you've literally got Perth on the west coast, and then you've got all the cities on the east coast. But
yes.
then there's nothing else. It's just outbacks, desert, whatever.
It's
It's like
uh,
I just had in my head that there was all these cities are dotted around here, and it's not. It's literally
nah.
just on the coast, and that was it.
Well,
And
we're only 200 years old. It's not, when you go to the UK, you can find a park bench that's over 200 years old. I mean, but when you walk around Australia, I mean, before I'll tell you in a second how I ventured to Europe, but to live there for a couple of years recently. Before I went to Europe, I spent 4 months in a caravan living in the northwest of Western Australia, which is really pure Indigenous Australia. And there's things there we saw which were 40,000 years old. So it's crazy that we live in this isolated place with such a rich cultural history. My business partner and good friend in Simon Bartold is only 3,500 kilometres away from me in the next capital city.
only.
So it would take me 3 days to drive there to visit him nonstop, and about 4 hours of flying. So when you consider, but the interesting thing about Perth, Nick, is that I can jump on well, I can't at the moment, but I can jump on a plane and fly direct to Heathrow. And that's with the new Airbus. We digress from footwear, but I can sit on an airplane for near 14, 15, 16 hours and land in Heathrow. So we are connected to the rest of the world somewhat on this side compared to the East Coast.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I started to explore this international footwear scene because it was very foreign to. I mean, you can understand podiatry is a cottage industry, and we all know each other, and it's a great little hub. But being in the most isolated city in the world in podiatry is another level. That's a really isolated cottage industry. So when I plonked myself into this footwear space, it was really happening. And so the next thing I did was I went to this school in Walwick, which is just out of Amsterdam, about a 1 hour train ride out of Amsterdam, which is a footwear hub in the Netherlands. And there was a school there called SLEM, and it was run by Nicolene van Enter, who's a really reputable leader figure in footwear in globally, especially in sustainability. And Nicolene ran a series of courses, and one of the courses happened to be with a friend of mine at the time, a guy called Dan Bailey, who was is founder of Concept Kicks, which is a really popular account on Instagram for footwear innovation. And I was in contact with Dan. Had a conference there. I went to Europe and sort of went headfirst into athletic footwear and started to learn a lot more about it. So that was my footwear, schooling.
Yeah.
And then I found myself in Europe. Obviously, at that time, I visited Simon Bartold, my good friend. As I said before, he was living in Annecy, working for Salomon at the time. I stayed a couple of nights in in Annecy, and thought this would be a great place to bring my family if I ever had the opportunity. Fortunately, I did. I left podiatry, and on another business venture, it took me to Europe, and I lived in Annecy from late 2019 till late 2017 till late 2019, where I worked closely with Simon and obviously created the affiliation with Bartold Clinic, was a partner, and also found this footwear project.
Yeah, it's a lovely part of the world. Because I think that's where we got to know each other well. Because obviously I was part of that Solomon sort of think tank, and then you were over on it. Then there was you and Simon are running one of the Bartold Clinical footwear masterclasses, and it was all over in Annecy, and it was just beautiful part of the world. I still go looking back, and there's on the last day of the think tank meeting, Simon took us up to this cafe in the top of the mountains, and it was just beautiful, absolutely stunning. And yeah.
Now I think Nick, you're talking about the cafe called Lo Garaggio, which was half the way up Croix Free, which is on the way to Manigo. Now that features in the documentary Icarus. I don't know if you've seen that cycling documentary. So when he breaks his gears and in cycling up the hill, that's where it happens. Now, that segues really nicely into this discussion about the IDO, because Simon went over there to do the last masterclass. He was at the time no longer working for Salomon. He ventured from Australia. I was still living there. Went through the last masterclass. It must have been March in 2019, and we invited the guys from Osaka to meet us in Annecy, which was just a short plane trip for them. And we took them to Logaraggio, the cafe up there, and we had a one-day meeting discussing how we could put our brains together and create the world's best hockey shoe.
Well, the world's best hockey shoe, and also the first ever proper hockey shoe. There have been other shoes out there that they've been marketed as hockey shoes, but they've been rehashed from different types of Astros and whatnot and running shoes, and they're not out and out hockey shoes. And I did mention it to Simon, what was that, 2017, when I was in New York with him, and I sort of said that, look, hockey is either the second or the third biggest sport in the world, and yet we haven't got a shoe that actually is made for hockey. And actually, anecdotally, the majority of hockey players I knew at the time were wearing the Salomon Speedcross, which is not a hockey shoe, it's a trail shoe, but actually that was, at the time, in my opinion, most probably the best shoe to play hockey in. But then you're playing a sport in a shoe that wasn't designed to play the sport, and that's the best you got. And you sat there scratching your head thinking, come on, there has to be something better. And then I remember Simon smiled at the time, and now I know why he smiled, because there were plans in the background already happening, I should imagine, about developing.
Yeah, it might have been. Yeah, it might have been around that. I went to the story how it progressed to the point where we had the hockey shoe was I went to a trade workshop in Milan called Linapel. And if anyone's interested in footwear, they should head down there and just mingle. And there's a core group of, I guess they call themselves footwear innovators. They're really creative design guys. And they've got their own jobs, but they've got side hustle Instagram accounts. They kind of have this community online. And sort of they were really interested in what I was doing there, because being a podiatrist, it was kind of fish out of water, really. But they were super curious about foot health, biomechanics and performance. And the discussion folded into with one of the designers who knew of a hockey brand who wanted to build a shoe for the Tokyo Olympics. Yeah. And we had really limited time. As you probably know, it takes 18 months to 2 years from concept to on the shelf. But obviously with the team that we put together, which is it was backed by Osaka out of Antwerp, and Simon and I created the concept and modeling of the shoe. We had an excellent designer in Asia who was the conduit for the deal and the ideas altogether. And then John Prescott, who's former head of Nike Global Sourcing, Timberland Global Sourcing, Adidas Global Sourcing. He was on the board of directors for ASICS Global. And John's based in Asia and has a great network of material sourcing and manufacturing. But not only that, had the manufacturing that we really needed to make the best shoe we could, because obviously we're up against the giants. And not to say that they've got unlimited budget, but they could certainly.
They've got more resources. Yeah,
exactly, on hand, on tap. And but unfortunately for them, they've always considered field hockey as a franchise. They've kind of just said, look, it's a sport that people, if we just put that out there, they'll just buy it.
Yeah.
And that's no disrespect to their product, because they do make top end product and they've got top end athletes and top end equipment, everything else. But we just felt with our knowledge of and our expertise, we felt having the focus on the athlete comes first and athlete care. And with Osaka has a number of the world's best field hockey players. and we worked really closely with them. I mean, at the time there was Felix Denayer, and Arthur Van Doren is like peer selected world's best player, and we worked really closely with these guys to say, look, what is it that you want? What do you feel you want? And then it was super exciting. We got to the point where we could put on their foot what we'd concepted off the back of their advice and connected our knowledge in with that. And then voila, we had this shoe, which is the IDO MK1.
Yeah, and you going back to the point you said about Milan, it was we one of our previous episodes, I think it was 2 episodes ago, we had a lady called Caroline French on, and she owns a shoe shop that's about 300 years old in Southampton in the UK.
Older than Australia.
Pardon? Yeah,
Older than
yeah.
Australia.
And it's sort of, she's 9th generation family member, so it's been passed through the family, and it's an amazing shoe shop because they actually fit your shoes properly, and it's mostly one of the only places in the south coast in the UK that actually do that properly, in my opinion. And we were speaking about that disconnect between what happens in the commercial world, what happens in consumer level, then medical, and you then sort of said they were just interesting as a medical professional. You were going to a footwear industry conference, and I've always campaigned that actually we need to get that gap as small as we can, because we both know the capabilities from a technology viewpoint on what you can do with footwear compared to what is out there for the consumer to buy are worlds apart. And that's partly because of fear of change, knowledge gaps. But I'm just thinking, with modern technology and social media, like,
yeah,
you're on the other side of the world to me, and we can hold a conversation now. And I sort of think,
exactly.
Why can't we bridge that education gap and start bringing medical, consumer, retail all together as one, so everyone learns? Because there's so much that you can learn as there's so much I can learn going speaking to the people that make the shoes, because they'll know stuff that I don't even think existed yet. And then there's so much the retail can then learn from medical.
Exactly.
We're only scratching the surface on this, and I think it's really, really important that that's
absolutely, like as I was going to before, that the power that the profession holds with, like, Nick, there's a lot of noise in between what you're saying with regards to producing a product and then it ending up in the shop, and a lot of that sort of stuff comes down to dollars, and retailers can only buy into certain amounts of stock. And a lot of the times it's influenced by, well, that shoe looks good, we're going to buy lots of them. Okay, you're on the shop front, you're a size 42D. Oh, we've only got a B, we're going to sell on that instead of this. So, the whole consumer experience thing and podiatry, and, the last time a salesperson sees the shoe is once they've sold it. That's it. And if there's an issue with it, they'll come back. They've got no idea if the consumer is going to get along with the shoe or not. Podiatry or physio or chiro, they'll hear how people have progressed with the footwear, even if you've prescribed it over time. And I think that's so valuable for brands. And I just still don't know why they don't draw on that yet. But as far as design's concerned, like hanging out with these innovators at Vinapel, the Daniel Baileys and the Vitos, and these guys that are kind of all in the mix. There's a bunch of knit innovators. Suzanne Odenhengel out of the Netherlands. Follow her Instagram account. It's just amazing what these guys are capable of. But if you marry that up with the concept that you can come up with from what we offer, that's very powerful stuff for brands, and they haven't quite got that together yet. So we use that a lot with the Osaka project to draw in Aisha's design capabilities with what we were thinking, and it worked really well.
No. So now, talk me through then what makes this hockey shoe it is.
Well, it's a really interesting. I've only just looked at it then, and exactly what you said. I've never thought about it, but I'll break it down as far as like, you and I can discuss openly. What do you think is really important for an athlete, a top level Olympic athlete that currently wears whatever products out there in hockey?
Yeah.
versus what we could offer. And the first thing that we had to think about was a whole umbrella of situations. And the first thing is like, what surface are they playing on? And it's this water-based, like obviously they pour water on the thing at halftime, before the game at halftime and end of time. It's always underwater. The second thing they do is it's like a particular type of AstroTurf that has a special features to it, whatever it is. It's also cushioned, so you have to consider ground reaction forces. It's an agility sport. There's lots of turning, changing direction. There's lots of running backwards. There's lots of deceleration moments, like, really stopping and pivoting. Obviously one of the most important things is weight. So we went through this process of writing down athlete feedback, having a look at what they were wearing. And to be honest, the first thing I did was I went down to the local hockey club and I actually reached out to some of my friends in Perth while I was in Europe, and I didn't tell them what I was up to, but I asked them to weigh their hockey shoes while they were dry, and then I got them to weigh their socks and then their shin pads. And they came up with a weight X. And then I asked them to weigh them at half time, and then I asked them to weigh them at full time. And these guys were carrying around half a kilo of extra weight toward the end of the game compared to the beginning.
We know from some of the running research that 100 grams can correlate to around about 1% of it. Now, obviously, that's in the endurance runner. So obviously trying to stipulate, we can't say that's always going to be in a hockey club, but we know there's a definite link between how heavy a shoe is and the things that go with the shoe and actually energy expended. So i.e. we know the lighter the better, the lighter the shoe is, the less energy you're going to spend.
Exactly. And I think, like, if you consider it in a hockey sense, I mean, fatigue, there's a greater risk of injury. But also not only a performance thing, but it's like, okay, how can we? So then I started saying to the players, and I let it slip to a couple of the Belgian red guys, and I said, look, you should change your shin guards and socks at half time. And all of a sudden they're all changing their socks and shin guards at half time, because you got to remember that 1% is as the weight adds on, but it becomes exponential over time. So as your fatigue increases, so does that 1% becomes more than 1%, if you know what I mean. So we had this the weight consideration was a big one, and we came in at 285 grams with our sample, and we were ecstatic. Then we also tried to keep the player as low to the ground as possible, because you can see I don't want to name the braces, but you see these exoskeleton type braces, and a lot of the elites were going for these braces, but that's, in our view, was because the shoes had very square edges and the shoes wouldn't conform to natural movement. And so you had great moments throwing through joints at through agility movement. And you found that, as a result, they were either busting up ligaments and joints. And so they were then trying to support that with exoskeleton type features. And for us, it was a matter of changing the behavior of the interface between the foot and the ground to change those force curves and make it easier for the athletes. So we successfully did that via decoupling, combined with what we call the O spot in the shoe, which was a centralized, with the red dot is a centralized piece of materials that I guess you could sort of call it a pivot point, and all of the cleats are circular around that. So it had multidirectional cleats. It never really went without grip. So and also the upper was kind of like specific to very lightweight, doesn't maintain and hold water. So we did retest, and we did test comparisons between competitors in our shoe. We found that there was at RS Labs in Belgium, which is where your force plates come from, and they have a full testing lab there with Jempy. We work closely with him, and look, hey, it works. I'll actually try and get the data and post it, offer it to you so you can have a look. But testing against other shoes, It's actually on the YouTube documentary of the Osaka IDO. You'll see a little bit of the testing with Arthur Van Doren. And yeah, it's essentially the decoupling doing its thing. It's designed to
But that makes perfect sense. Because do you think hockey is a multi-directional sport where you're running forwards and you're running backwards an awful lot? There's not many other sports where you're actually running backwards a lot of the time. And it's even for me, just as me taking my sort of podiatry hat off and putting my hockey player hat on, because I think everyone knows that hockey's my sort of my main passion, and why I love to shoot.
Yeah, I guess
that's why when you look on the grips on the shoes, you can see sort of the lugs on the shoe that you've got some that face one way, some that face another. And you said, well, that makes perfect sense if you're running forwards and backwards to give you that grip. A lot of the time you'll be running backwards and then you then got to do a 180 and sprint off in the other direction.
Exactly.
And that's when you look at the majority of people wearing other footwear for hockey, that's the majority of the time you find that they're slipping up because the shoe just hasn't got the grip. And it's also, I think, if we look at the sides of the shoes, it is sort of curved up because there's a lot of pushing off in the inside and the outside of a foot at very quick times in all sorts of directions. And if you if you got sort of square edge shoe, you're just going to fall off the cliff from your grip perspective, aren't you? And it was,
Yep. Yeah. There were 2 points to that. The first point was that when you start a footwear project, the first thing that you do is you create a Pinterest board and you just dump ideas and photos of there. And a lot of the photos that we collected from hockey were players trying to change direction, but the footwear failing. And it might be that the foot just slides off the interface, like it's just the upper's just hanging on and the foot's off the side of the shoe, and so we created the midsole as a bucket, and with the anatomical lasting, it really contains the foot. Then we created the upper with the double layers and the slings and everything to hold it. So that was something that we found in the photos and the images to be super important to us, is to make sure that if you're going to make this awesome midsole outsole combination, then you've got to have the foot really well contained on it. So that was the first thing thought of in like, okay, how does it perform? Then obviously cleat configuration, that took us ages to come up with, like to really brainstorm and figure out what was going to work best. And we often found that, the whole idea of the decoupling is to allow the shoe to work like a mattress. If you go and jump on one of these mattresses with the separated springs, one part of the mattress will move and the other part of the mattress will stay dead still. So you never, like, the whole idea of mirrored decoupling in the shoe is to ensure that there's full contact at one point without a penalty to the foot or the athlete. Because if you imagine there's a flat base on a shoe without decoupling, like some of our competitors have, you would find that the shoe hits the ground and it's flat. Well, the entire foot has to cop that to accommodate. But if you've got a shoe which is flexible, well, you get full contact period, and you also get the performance benefits as well.
You can't do anything to stop those motions happening because it's just part of the sport. It's going to happen.
That's exactly it.
And the issue, if you've got a shoe that's sort of opposing that, you're not being able to dissipate that load. And remember, Simon, I believe, helped design a netball shoe because they had a similar thing in that peak braking force. So what we mean by that is the ability of you're moving to suddenly just stopping all of a sudden. With netball, that thing where you jump down, you're not allowed to move, so you jump, and then they see a lot of anterior cruciate ligaments. Well, why don't you design a shoe that does move slightly so that can attenuate some of that load, so it's not going through your ACL all of the time? And
that's exactly right.
Similar concept with this.
Yeah, it's just playing around with the force curves really and it's like anything at the moment, we're sort of pushing ahead with material science and product to enable the athlete to get the best out of themselves. And this is what we found in hockey, is that there was lots of effort made in sticks and there was lots of effort made in other everything except for footwear. So it was low hanging fruit to go and create something that would service the elite hockey player. But I think the other really important thing that I think discuss is, Mike Friton was really instrumental in teaching about how materials behave and their influence on the shoe. And he's really into origami, which is just simply folding paper. We would sort of view it as, oh, yeah, you make a nice little swan or paper airplane or something. But what that is that's turning a 2D form into 3D with a purpose. So that's like a flat piece of paper and folding it into something which is functional. And that's purely changing the behavior of not the material, but the behavior of like the form. And so as soon as you get like a midsole with grip, well, that's pretty standard. Anyone can make a midsole with grip, but can you change the behavior to service the sport and the athlete?
Well, and also these were made primarily for the elites in Tokyo, which
100%,
will happen at some point. When it will happen, not convinced it will go ahead this year. But it's a whole nother story. But we've still got 3 or 4 people at my hockey club who have now got a set of the Osakas, and it's sort of even at its that's a sort of sub-elite and non-elite level. You've got a shoe where actually, okay, you can play on a 100% water-based pitch. You can play on what's called a sand rest pitch, which is a water-based pitch but with sand, or you can play on a purely sand-based. So then you've then got a shoe that is actually, you've got the task of trying to design a shoe that works well on 3 different surface types.
Yeah.
Then you've got the thing of actually, we had the discussion before we hit record about anyone that wears foot orthoses in hockey, you'll tend to find sand gets inside the shoe if you play on a sand dress, and you just get the sand just destroys anything in the shoe. So you've got to then find glues and materials that can withhold basically just being ground away by sand. And it's brutal. You think of it as it's an easy task just to design a hockey shoe, but when we actually then think about everything, the complex nature, it's not easy.
Yeah, and one of our biggest challenges was like this: as soon as you make materials lighter, they're more vulnerable because it's really rare that you get a super strong shoe without jeopardizing weight. I mean, you can make a really strong shoe, but it's heavy, and so you're then working through this process of what's more important. Do you then weigh up durability and so on and so forth? But and there's no lie, this is the most expensive hockey shoe going around, I think, or second most expensive. And it's like, it's actually not designed to last longer than a season. It's just we couldn't design something for that and get the same outcome. And so, the philosophy that we took behind this product was along the lines of, a triathlete might use training wheels during the week, and when they're racing, they'll put their racing wheels on. So we try and we also try and encourage, as you well know, in musculoskeletal medicine, mixing things up is a pretty good idea these days.
Not to try and reduce injuries,
not to keep the anatomy guessing, but just to allow a broader spectrum of accommodation. And we also wanted the feeling that when someone put these shoes on, they were like, oh, wow, like, this is really, like, I feel really fast. So then we set about, obviously, designing our second shoe, which is a cheaper range training shoe, which is due out in about 3 months, I think. Which is
there we go. An exclusive, because no one else would have seen this yet. No
one else has seen this, mate. And the only person that has worn it is the best player in the world, Arthur Van Doren. Really nice looking shoe.
I thought you were going to say my name.
It's in the mail. No, so full contact outsole this time, and probably a little bit more hybrid in between what someone currently wears versus this is just different, and it's got anatomical lasting, and it's a 10 mil drop, so a little bit more traditional. But as you know, anatomical lasting is another feature of engineering that we've built into these shoes that make a massive difference. Now the person can sit inside, the foot can sit inside the shoe, not on top of it. And some of the elite hockey shoes we found, the players are sitting about 4 centimeters or 40 millimeters above the ground. It's just too high, too high.
Efficient.
So,
You need to be like, if you think like hockey, and then I cycle as well, and both times I'm spending in a flex position. Like hockey, I'm just constantly down in a flex position. And I remember when I was doing some of my S&C training with an old S&C coach, they would get me to do walking lunges, and my coach could back squat double what I could, but actually holding a dumbbell, I could do a walking lunge with a much heavier weight, because I spend my whole sporting life in that squatted position, lunging around. So you touched on the subject there that I think, like you say, like if you're a runner, you have training shoes and you have race shoes. But why not having that in hockey? I don't understand. So you can use that Kai shoe as your training type shoe, and then you can use this shoe here is your your match day shoe.
It all comes out in the wash. That's the term you'd use anyway, because you buy 2 sets of shoes and they last twice as long. So it's not like people would view it as, oh, that's too expensive up front. But if you happen to reduce the risk of injury, let's say, for example, you just by mixing it up, plus you've got your elite shoes and you're going to perform better. They're not wet every day when you go to play. Obviously, hockey's got a massive issue with trying to get the shoes dry before you play the next game. So, I mean, you might sort of see me here saying, oh, yeah, this is the guy with a footwear company that's trying to sell us 2 pairs of their shoes. But it's not that. It's that if a patient of mine presented to the practice and they had, a pair of your Nike competitive marathon running shoes, then you would sort of turn around and say, look, this is not your everyday shoe, and they'd probably understand that. It's like, okay, I need a pair for intervals, I need a pair for race day, whatever else. Well, I don't see why hockey's any different.
No, it's not.
I think,
I can't. It just makes perfect sense. If you can say, okay, we don't know whether it may reduce the number of injuries, it may not. But then also the thing is, if you can then reduce the longevity, so then actually, then you may then make the it may last 2 seasons if you're wearing it half the amount of time. You may find that actually by wearing these shoes, you're slipping up less, so your game improves. There are so many, I think, upsides to it. And when I first started, I was late to hockey. I started playing hockey when I was like 13, 14, and we were still just having wooden sticks. Composite sticks were just coming out. But if you were spending north of 100 quid on a stick, you're like, wow, this is like top of the range stick. Now you can easily spend way over 300 quid on a stick. So your people spending 300 quid on a stick. So if people are preparing to invest that in a stick, then surely they should be prepared to invest that in the shoes. And look, we're both going to be biased due to our background and our sort of podiatry training, as it were. But I think foot is most probably the most underestimated thing in any athletic event. And when you think about it, it's the first thing that comes in contact with the ground. You could have the best stick in the world. That means that you could drag flick the ball at 100 miles an hour every single time without fail. But if you got a shoe that every time you try to do that, you slipped up, that stick's useless. It does.
Well, it's a matter of also getting to the ball first. You could have a really good stick, but if you're not going to get there because you're carrying that extra 50 grams, or if you can't change direction as quick as others, then all of a sudden you're finding yourself with this great stick, but it's not got any cherries on it. It's not scuffed at all. It's brand new because you're not getting near it. And I think that's what we're trying to sort of say to the hockey community, is that this is a exclusive hockey brand, a small, like when you compare it to the giants, like your Nikes and Addies and this is a brand that doesn't have their budget, that's gone like, look, we need to service the player. Like they desperately need, elite footwear. So, I think it's a great move by Osaka, and I think it's, the shoe's going to hold them in good stead moving forward. It's a great start, and they've, interesting that Osaka, we obviously decided to start at the top and work down to the broader community, and I think that's also been obviously it's a risky move, but because you you sell more shoes at a lower price point to the general public. But I think it's the right move because it demonstrates that they really wanted to get the most out. They wanted to service the game, the guys that have committed the most to the game, and they wanted to service their athletes. And I can see why they've done that. So,
but you then think, go back to like, it then allows the technology and what you then learn to then filter. If you look at motorsport, for example, you look at Formula One, a lot of what happens in Formula One then filters down into modern day cars.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Same concept with the shoes, and I'm really excited to see what Mark II is like, because there are things that I would straight away want to improve for my own personal thing, but I'm thinking,
sure.
This is Mark I, and
I've got a pen and paper here, Nick. Let's go.
Yeah. So for me, I understand why the upper is quite stiff, because obviously everyone saw that picture of the guy breaking the 5K record and his foot sliding off because the upper was so flexible. But for me as a hockey player, I would want to try and get an upper that held your foot but had a little more give. And the toe box. For me, I understand why the toe box is quite rigid, because if you get hit on the foot, it hurts. My philosophy is that, unfortunately, if you're getting hit on the foot a lot, either be a better player or just move your feet out of the way.
Interesting you say that. Yeah, that's common feedback. Yeah.
And also, I find sometimes the lacing structure, I can't get quite an even throughout the whole shoe. And so sometimes I feel like I may just have to adjust the laces at half time because I feel it's digging in certain part of my foot. Now, I do have the cavoid foot with your sort of typical midfoot hump in it. And so I've had to play around with the laces to get them, but then sometimes I feel like the forefoot's slightly too loose.
I think that's a last thing. We've got that's not. It's only common with the high arch foot. We've got one guy in our team that does have a high arch foot that has the same feedback. So I've got the anatomical last. Where is it? Here it is. That's the last of the IDO. And you can see it does have a bit of a square nose on it, which we're going to have to shave down a little bit next one, I'd say, compared to the traditional last, so that your viewers can see flat base on that one versus the curved base. So depending on what your configuration is with the curved base can change the features on the upper. So there is a little bit of tinkering to do there, I agree. And you'll notice that on this one, which is the Kai, it hasn't got the significant toe box.
Yeah.
See? So there's a few things that are changing.
One more thing I would say is I would like trying to have, it has much better grip on the lateral and medial aspects of the shoe, but I'd want more. Because still sometimes when you're in those extreme positions, you push off, I still slip sometimes.
Oh, you can feel it. Yeah, okay. Is that in any change when it's drying out a bit, or is it you don't notice the pitch conditions? Or
no, that tends to be more when on our sand dress pitch when it's wetter. When it's dry, it's not an issue. It's just when it's significantly wet, because it rains a lot in the UK. So that would be my only thing. But that's, like, I may be asking for the impossible with that.
No, I think it's interesting. Like there's I mean, as we spoke about before, the variations of pitches are just like, and so this particular shoe was designed exclusively for the elites on the water pitches, and sometimes depending on how much sand is sort of packed into those things as well.
Well, I had the same issue when I played purely on a water-based pitch.
Okay. Yeah.
But that was a pitch that the surface is really, really old, and it doesn't drain that well. So there's much more surface water than there would be on what the elites play on. So again, that would be. But apart from that, I wouldn't dream of putting any other shoe on now to go play hockey.
I think what you're saying is exactly the same mindset that I always had when I was viewing shoes and sort of the first time saying, how can I make this better? And that's kind of exactly what you're sort of voicing, is like, little points of like, how we can tick the boxes on certain things.
Yeah, but we know full well that it often takes 2 or 3 tries to get to a point where you because you don't know these problems, these slight minor changes that you need exist until you go out and test it for a long period of time. It's but the ones I will say,
Exactly.
it feels extremely stable, extremely quick and agile. It is super light, and change of direction in this shoe is far better than whatever I had in my speed cross. Yeah, and it does feel such a nice responsive shoe. So
Yeah,
yeah,
most people sort of say it's so different, but it's in a good different, and it's kind of like if the Ido felt the same as what they were traditionally wearing, I'd be bitterly disappointed. It's not
yeah.
supposed to be the same as a hockey shoe. It's supposed to be, we're trying to redefine what, and it will take other brands, 18 months to 2 years to play around to get some similar concepts into theirs, and by that stage we'll be advancing ours. And so pretty exciting. And I think first shot, given the time that we had to produce the shoe,
Amazing job.
yeah, the feedback we're getting is like, oh, it's the best, but we've just got to kind of now fine tune that and get the momentum going. Sales have been great, even through the COVID situation. We've had all the major retailers pick it up, and just strong support for the.
Well, I know
I
the
think
sales
for
are
the
great
concept.
because there were stock issues in trying to get me a pair.
Yeah, I mean, look, we had this situation which we don't people in sort of on the retail side probably wouldn't have an insight into it, but the whole COVID thing, when COVID hit throughout February, March, or even earlier January, February, China just shut down, and even if you manufacture in Vietnam, our factories in China, but it doesn't matter. All of the sourcing of materials, you can't avoid China. It's just such a monster in providing materials for footwear, and all of those factories that were used for footwear were commandeered by the government to provide manufacturing for PPE.
Yeah.
So we couldn't make any shoes, and then when you could make them, you could only make some, and then then it was really impossible to get materials, and then it was impossible to move it around. And there was Trump stuff happening in the background, like tariffs and bits and pieces, and it's like, oh man, there's a lot of headwinds, and it wasn't smooth sailing, and so obviously we had to service which is the whole reason why we did it, was to service our athletes first, and so and our great supporters in the retailers that back the Osaka product. So that had to go through first, and then finally there was a couple more shipments that came through that we could honour those people that were close to, obviously Bartol Clinical and the podiatry community. So and now that's happening, and obviously even to add on to that is supporters of our community, plus those that play hockey, which Nick Knight fits into perfectly.
Yeah, no, it's as you know, it's an area that I've got an absolute growing fabulous interest in, is the footwear industry, and how you can, for me, it's about how we can design athletic footwear specific for the sport, but then close the gap between consumer, medical, and design to work out, okay, how can we accelerate everyone's learning and get the best products out there? Because hockey's been around for years and years and years, and why is it only in sort of 2020 you finally get a shoe that is designed for hockey? It's sort of just madness when you think about that.
Yeah, it is incredible, isn't it? I think it's just one of those things. I think it's kind of like, as I said, brands try and bundle it up into a franchise, and there's lots of. I mean, hockey is a Commonwealth sport, and there's quite a few Commonwealth sports I can think of like that. And but hockey is definitely one that was, for us, sparked so much interest in the project, because it was and Osaka were great like that. They said, you guys just go and make something that you think is it. And so that's the first go. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a nice place to now wrap nice things up. So I want to just thank you very much for coming. I absolutely just enjoyed this, and I could happily speak for another 2-3 hours. But whilst it's 11:15 over here in the morning for me, it's actually getting rather late for you in the evening.
It's a bit, yeah. It's later on in the day, but no, Nick. Like obviously, value being able to come on and talk about obviously what we both love, which is footwear, and mixing that up with our podiatry interests. And no, thank you so much for inviting me onto the show, and love what you're doing.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing the Kai when it comes out as well. It is
the Nick Knight signature edition.
Yeah, it is. It's so thank you for coming on. And so don't forget to subscribe and like to the channel, everyone. I will pop all the links around about the Osaka and everything that's Paul said in the comments below. As always, if you've got any interest that anything people want me to chat about, or specific guests you want me to get on, then please let me know. But everyone stay safe, and we shall see you all next month. See you later. Bye.